Our organizations combine to collaborate whenever possible. Although our organizations are nonpartisan, we do come together to further and enhance each other's programming and activities. Today, we come together as voices of the candidates who seek the office of Cook County State's Attorney. We're not just here today to listen to their platform and everything for our support, but to let them know what we expect of them. As president of the National Planning Council of Chicago, I've attempted to move our council in the direction of true civic engagement. As the great man once said, society changes as the laws change. Today, we look to start that discussion. And we try to reform the criminal justice system that has all too often treated minorities unfairly. With that being said, I look for us to have a productive and peaceful program. This is not a rally or a protest. We're not here to chant, yell, or be racist. We're here to listen, hear their statements, and our goal is to meet on some common ground. It is my belief that it doesn't matter who holds the office, but what does matter is what we demand of them. We have too often elected officials and not demanded anything from them. Our community has never developed an agenda, a plan of action for ourselves, and today is the first step in that direction. So I'll turn it over to Kimberly, and I look forward to us having a great forum. Let me say again, a great and peaceful forum. Thank you.
We now hear from Dr. Okay, thank you. We will now hear comments from Dr. Michelle Payne, who is a member of Delta Sigma Theta, and she also is a former co-chair. How many of you know that it is cold outside? Well, guess what? The sun is shining, and we absolutely are grateful to have you here. We thank you for braving the cold to join us today. I want to share with you all a story that I read last week. And it was a story of a neighbor who heard a barrage of gunshots as he sat in his home. When he went outside, there was a victim, a 14-year-old victim, that lay there dead on his front lawn. As this neighbor cleaned the concrete, the blood off his concrete, what he learned was blood did not come off the grass. I challenge you guys today to listen to the candidates as they present their platform to you. I challenge you to make an informed decision. I challenge those of you who are not registered to vote to make your way to a table where we have a deputy registrar who will be more than happy to. We know that this office is charged with acting on behalf of the citizens. So in that regard, again, listen intently and make an informed decision. Thank you for coming. What do you feel is the key mission and job description of the Cook County State's Attorney? And we will go in alphabetical order, and then we will proceed however you'd like to say it. So, State's Attorney Anita Alvarez.
Okay, thank you. The vision of the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, as she had just described as the definition of the State's Attorney. However, the vision and the real mission, number one, is justice and making sure that our number one concern is public safety and doing what is best to keep all of our communities safe. That is the goal at the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, and that's something that we work each and every day. We are the second largest office in the nation with over 850 attorneys and another 1,500 total employees. What we see each and every day, I don't have to remind everybody in this room, is that the violence each and every day on the streets here in Chicago disproportionately affects our minority communities. My victims of crime are victims of color, and that's what I see each and every day. And so our mission and our goal is to make sure that we are going into court and speaking up on behalf of the victims of crime that unfortunately are seeing, that we keep seeing an increase of here in the city of Chicago. We have a lot of duties. It's not just the criminal side, there's a whole civil side that most people forget about. We also do child enforcement. there's a juvenile bureau, there's a whole administrative bureau. So statutorily, we have more duties than any other state's attorney's office in the nation. So it's a lot of duties, it's a lot of responsibility, but number one is to seek justice and make sure that justice is fair.
So hold on to the mic, thank you very much. Because the second part of that question is why is your vision for this office better than the other candidates, i.e., what makes you the most qualified person for this office?
I started in this office back in 1986 when I got out of Chicago Kent Law School. I was a Loyola graduate undergrad and I majored in social work, and I thought that this was the perfect job for me to kind of combine that background with being a lawyer. I have worked my way up through this office and then got that crazy notion back in 2007 to run. Since I've taken over, this office does not look anything like it did certainly when I started back in 1986. And I'm proud of all the new programs that I've been able to implement and changing the way we do things in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. Never before was there felony diversion programs for first-time offenders available before 2008. After I took over, I implemented a variety of new diversion programs focusing on felony offenders. We started with approximately 8 different alternative programs. We now have 30. I'm very proud of that because that gives people who do make a mistake a second chance. Because we can all agree, and I think we'd all be better if we see less people in the criminal justice system. We're going to do our best to make sure we give people a second opportunity. I implemented the first ever conviction integrity unit, looking at the old cases, making sure that we are getting it right, because no, justice is not served if we've convicted the wrong person. And with the advancement of forensics, we're able to look at these old cases. It's the first ever conviction integrity unit in this office. I brought back our community justice centers, which I want to do more of because they're so important, because they're storefront offices in communities where you can just walk in and we can help you on a variety of issues. It's so important. They're effective, and it's something that I'd like to continue to do and I'd like to expand.
Attorney Kimberly Foxx. Would you like to? Could you? Of course. Okay, so part A, what do you feel is the true mission and job description of a Cook County State's Attorney?
First of all, good afternoon. It is an honor to be here among all of you as a member of the Sigma Theta to see the divine nine come together around these important issues in our community means a great deal. First and foremost, the office of the Cook County State's Attorney should be one of a justice seeker. It should be justice and fairness and equality across the board. I think as we embark on Martin Luther King weekend, we have to ask the tough questions because the state's attorney is correct. Public safety is a concern. It should be the foremost of our minds. But justice and fairness and equality go hand in hand with public safety. Too many of our communities, as she indicated, have been ravaged by violence. But it's the same communities that have also been ravaged by the disinvestment of our resources. It is the same communities in which we see young children who have been arrested for offenses that are discipline actions and not criminal actions, and they flood our criminal court systems. We have the school to prison pipeline that goes through too many of our communities, and that's not an issue of public safety. In fact, it makes us less safe when we're arresting children for discipline issues and entangling them in our criminal justice system early. That when we have 92% of the children who are in our juvenile temporary detention center are African American and Latino, that is not fairness or equality. When 86% of the people who are in our jail systems are African American and Latino, that is not equality. When we talk about the disparity and how justice is meted out around communities, we know that there is an inherent disconnect between communities on the south and west sides, as there are in other parts of the county. Justice and public safety absolutely matter, but fairness and equality matter just as much. And so my vision for this office is not simply to deal with one aspect. The aspect of violence and what's happening in our neighborhoods is critical. But we only get there when we have communities that have faith in the system and we let those communities know.
So I believe that you went into the vision part. Would you like to expand on that? Because you did the second part as well. We have two parts, so you have more that you would like to say.
So my vision for the office would be one that's reflective of the communities that we seek to serve. And that the fact that the office doesn't look like it looked in 1986 is in fact a blessing, but we're not there. And we ought not be congratulating ourselves on the fact that we have a few more Black people or Latinos in positions in that office. We need to have an office that's reflective of the communities that it serves. When you have 86% of our criminal justice systems that are African American and Latino, and you can count on less than 2 hands the number of people of color in its supervisory positions, that's a problem. When you have people, I know that's not a Delta. When it doesn't matter if we are marginally better than we were before, it's not reflective of the communities that we serve. And that is my vision for that and why I feel uniquely qualified around these issues is one, because I'm not afraid to talk about the fact that our criminal justice system cannot be extracted from what happens around race, poverty, education, and class. And when we start talking about our criminal justice system in these small little boxes of good guys versus bad guys, and the fact is that a lot of our victims have at one point been defendants, and a lot of our defendants at some point may be a victim. And when we don't treat the communities first that have all of them, then we see policies like we've seen that emanated from the mid-'80s with mandatory minimum sentences that had a disproportionate impact on African Americans. And so to not have a real conversation, or I feel uniquely qualified at this point, because there's no fear to have a real conversation about the impact of all of these issues together on what a state's attorney's office that should be fair and just for everyone should be. And that's my vision for the office. Part of that, at the core, is making sure that diversity is not just in low-level assignments, but throughout the office.
Attorney Donna More.
Thank you again for inviting me. I'm so happy to be here. I have a vision for the office that rests on 2 things. And the first one is that you have to prosecute crime no matter who commits it. And it's a simple sentence, but it's an important sentence because you have to rise above politics, race, money, uniform. And we haven't seen that, certainly in the past 7 years. The other thing is that I view the office, the role of state's attorney, as being a very activist role. The state's attorney needs to be out in the communities, listening to the problems of the community, and meeting with community groups and not-for-profit groups, and figuring out how to solve those problems before a crime happens. And in order to do that, the state's attorney must enjoy the trust of a community and be transparent about how the office is working and why you're doing something or why you're not doing something. I have 3 things that I want to institute. Reform in the office to actually make it justice over convictions, a gun policy, which I put out a couple of months ago, which is the forefront of what we need to address. And the final thing I want to address, which is the elephant in the room, is public corruption. Because when I appeared before the South Side mayors, the South Suburban mayors, they said to me things I already knew, which is they have called the state's attorney's office, they have tried to give them information on political corruption in their communities, and they didn't get a call back. So we need to be politically independent as state's attorney because that's the only way we're going to combat corruption. Okay. So in terms of my experience for the office, I started out as an assistant state's attorney, went through the office, through all the ranks, was a supervisor in appeals, was a supervisor in felony review, and then was in the felony trial division at 26th in California. I went on to the U.S. Attorney's Office where I tried federal criminal cases and argued in the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. I went on from there to be general counsel for a state agency, help manage the agency, write the rules and regs for a brand new industry to keep the bad guys out. which I'm very proud of. The only bad guys that we've seemed to have in the industry have been our gubernatorial appointees who've been indicted. Since then, I've been in private practice. I've tried a lot of civil litigation, which is part of the office. I've tried administrative litigation, and I've also gotten pardons for deserving young men who I've worked very hard for. One took me 15 years. So I have a broad base of experience, which I think is helpful as opposed to just tunnel vision for being a longtime prosecutor. And that's why I think I'm qualified for the office.
Thank you very much. Attorney Christopher Pfannkuche.
I'd like to thank all of you for inviting me down here today and giving me this opportunity to speak to all of you about my thoughts for the State's Attorney's Office. The main role of the State's Attorney, as I see it, is to prosecute criminal offenders, to act as the voice of victims, and most importantly, above all else, to seek justice. Those words have resounded through my head for 31 years. They single-handedly have been the guiding principle of everything I do, no matter what, above all else, seek justice. The State's Attorney is in a unique position. The public trust is placed in the hands of the State's Attorney. That State's Attorney can either honor that public trust and do the right thing at all times, or that State's Attorney can lose the public trust. And that's the problem. As we sit here today, on this weekend, I reflect back on the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I remember words, very powerful words, that he spoke. And those words were that an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And I promise you that from day one, when I'm elected State's Attorney, I will go out and I will seek injustice anywhere and everywhere I find it in this county. No matter what form, no matter in what fashion, no matter who the person is that I'm looking for, if there is an injustice, I will go after it. Because, number one, that's what I've done for 31 years, and number two, that's the right thing to do. Very quickly, my goals upon getting elected, I will bring back integrity and trust to the State's Attorney's Office. I will very vigorously prosecute gun violence, which has been plaguing our communities. I will handle police-involved shooting cases. I will expedite them. I will handle them officially. I will handle them openly. The public needs to see what is going on these cases. I will go vigorously after public corruption cases, something that doesn't happen very much in this county. And one of my biggest points, I will have extensive community outreach programs. Because without the trust of the public, the people that I represent will represent, this office is nothing without that trust. Our office of prosecutors should be among the finest in the nation. But we should also have the trust of the people that we are elected to serve. And that is all of you. Thank you. You heard from my brief introduction, and thank you for reading my bio. My experience as a prosecutor is pretty extensive. I've been a criminal prosecutor for 3 different government agencies. I served for 31 years alone with Cook County State's Attorney's Office as a court prosecutor and trial supervisor. I'm very, very proud of my work there. Being a prosecutor has been in my blood all my life. I've tried over 2,000 felonies in that office in one form or another. I've handled tens of thousands of felonies, and I have no idea how many thousands of misdemeanor cases I've handled through the years. Additionally, I served a brief interim appointment that I'm very proud of as an assistant special independent prosecutor to Dan Webb, former U.S. attorney. And I also worked right out of law school. Although I'm from here locally, I went down to Decatur, Macon County, Illinois, where I worked down there for a while. By the time I left, I was head of the traffic division and did something I'm very proud of. I reduced the backlog of cases in my entire division by 54% in the time that I got, the time that I was down there. I think that's very significant. Again, I'm always guided by one simple principle: seek justice at all times. I'm a certified teacher, published author, licensed private detective, and I'm currently a police trained instructor. And I believe that's important because I'm out there trying to upgrade the professionalism of our law enforcement officers around Cook County. We need professional officers. Through the years, I've put on mock trials for area high school students to help get them involved with the criminal justice system in a positive way. I've put on expungement programs to help people clear their record and get jobs. And again, I put on police training programs to upgrade the professionalism of our police departments. I will supervise a team of prosecutors in one of the units that I worked in this office. I worked for a number of federal agencies. I have a lot of experience to bring to this office. I'd be very pleased if I could have your support and your vote come election day. Thank you.
Thank you. What intervention should this office in dealing with low-level offenses like juvenile, what we feel can and should be rehabilitated? And is anything working right now that you would utilize? What would you expand upon? What do you propose?
Thank you. That is an excellent question. And the fact of the matter is, we do treat juveniles differently than we do adults. And that's, Cook County is the home of the first juvenile court in the country, where there was a recognition in Cook County with Jane Addams that children were different than adults. And that the adolescent brain, I have a soon to be 13-year-old, she's special. And I hope that by 18, 19, 22, she's less special than she is right now. But we recognize that juveniles and adults, they do things impulsively, they do things without thinking. They do things like they fight on the school ground. But there is a statute in our Illinois code that makes fighting on the school grounds an aggravated battery, a felony. That every day in our system, we are arresting children from the schoolhouses as young as 12, fingerprinting them, taking their mugshot, giving them a CD number, a number where they're followed, and they go into our criminal justice system. When I say that we talk about the school to prison pipeline, what I'm telling you is we spend more time waiting for the gush at the end of the pipeline in 26 in California, and not enough at the school to stop them from coming in the first place. So one of the things that I did when I was a supervisor at the State Attorney's Office in juvenile was work with the schools within my districts to talk to them about stop arresting children for discipline issues and arrest them for criminal issues. Which you will find there are very few kids who do criminal things, they do juvenile things. And so enhancing a relationship with the schools across the board, having a relationship with the school superintendent, having more trainings with school officials about what the laws are in terms of juvenile justice and crime, so that we aren't wasting not only these children's lives, but tax dollars by having school officials spend more time in the courtroom than the classroom where other students aren't learning. Restorative justice programs are working. They tend to be in schools that are more heavily funded. The schools that need them the most are in the most under-resourced neighborhoods that have the highest incidence of arrest of children. And we need to expand those programs.
Attorney Moore.
I agree that juvenile justice needs to be a focus for the state's attorney's office because it's a focus for our community. And I think one of the things we have to make sure of is that we in the state's attorney's office have a consistent policy as how we are going to treat cases, whether they be in the city or in the suburban districts. Because all too often what we hear is that a black or brown child in the city is treated differently than a white child in the suburbs. And that comes from policies that aren't being properly enforced in the state's attorney's office. But what we also need to do is to reach out to the community, is to have an open door in the community, which we don't have right now. We hear from not-for-profits and community groups that they can't talk to the state's attorney's office. They can't get into the state's attorney's office. They don't have a voice. And that is something that we have to change. But I would note that all of my opponents are still in the office or recent graduates of the office, and yet no real juvenile reform has happened. We need somebody in there with a fresh face, a fresh voice. I've actually worked on cases on the other side, which is young minority men who got tangled up in the system when they were 17, 18 years old. They're now in their late 30s or early 40s. and they can't get a job after they graduated from college because of a felony conviction. And I've worked very hard to get 2 folks pardoned. I have 1 still pending. But it gives you a different view of the justice system when you're on the other side of it, when you've walked in somebody else's shoes. And that's a point of view that my opponents don't have. Thank you.
Thank you. Attorney Pfannkuche.
Like a lot of parts of our criminal justice system, the juvenile justice system is also greatly in need of reform. It's possibly one of the most important areas that are in need of reform. Because if we don't get to our youth before they grow up and make sure that they're traveling and going forth on the right path, then we've lost them for the rest of their lives. We need programs that get them involved. We need programs that keep them away from gangs. We need to get them involved in the legal system in positive ways. One of the things I've done, and I mentioned this briefly, is I've gone out and I've held mock trials in area high schools to try to get youth involved in the criminal justice system, to see what it's like to be a judge, to see what it's like to be a police officer, to see what it's like to be a defendant, to see what it's like to be a court reporter or a prosecuting attorney. We need to get them involved at an early age. And when things go wrong and the police show up and juveniles get arrested, we need to make sure that they're not marked or scarred for life with an arrest that's going to haunt them forever. We need to put more focus on the juvenile justice system because these kids are our future. So there's a lot of things, a lot of work that does need to be done in the juvenile area. Thank you.
Attorney Alvarez.
Thank you. Juvenile court is run under the concept of balance and restorative justice, and that is that to make sure that we divert these kids out and put them in programs so we keep them out of the system. What you don't understand is that each and every day, my assistants have to screen cases in which the police officers make an arrest and they bring these cases to us. We screen out last year 3,000 cases. 3,000 cases, which means we're not putting them into the system. And what I would like to see happen more, because first of all, many of our social service providers who run programs for us have been in deep trouble because they've lost their funding from the state, and they haven't been able to provide the services that we have relied on for years and years. The city has a program called the GISC, which is the Juvenile Intervention Service Center. There's only one. And there should be more of them. And the whole concept, what I'd like to see, is that the police don't even bring certain cases to us. They don't make the arrest. And that's what the GIST does, is that the officers are able to bring these children to the center, and they're not arrested. They're not brought to us. They're not going through that process, and we don't have to decline and refuse to put the case in the system. I think that's extremely important. There should be more opportunities. I've had several meetings with the city asking them to expand that, and that we should have, the officers should have the ability to make that decision before the case even gets to the courtroom, because I think that's important. I'm a mother of 4 children. And I have 18-year-olds, Kim, they don't get much better, I'm just going to say that. I fully agree that the kids being in the system is not where we want them to be. What good is it for any of us to fill up the juvenile court more? So I have tried to meet with CPS. I had several meetings canceled for that very reason, because I think Chicago Public Schools, we should have more of an influence in the curriculum so these kids aren't making those dumb mistakes, so we don't see them. I always say, when I speak to groups, to speak to young kids, I always say, I don't want to see you. And I mean that in a good way, right? Because if I see them, they're either a victim or they're a defendant. Neither one is good. And I think that should be our goal, is to make sure we have the services available for these children, because there's not enough out there right now.